Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world listening to this interview. My name is Mick, founder of the ACL Hub, and I've got the absolute pleasure of having another fellow Aussie on board tonight. I've had a few Americans and a few English people in the last few weeks, so it's nice to have a fellow Aussie on board talking ACLs. And Mr. Tim McGrath joining us from Washington. Tim, welcome.
Thanks for having me, mate.
Oh, mate, it's our pleasure. I've been a big fan of what you've produced with the pitch ready stuff over the years, and obviously followed rugby league circles a little bit, and seen your great work. So it's nice to be able to have a chat and pick your brains and help share some of your experiences with our audience. Just for some context, we've got yeah, probably a good mix of both patients, but also to early career clinicians that are kind of reading my stuff and listening to these interviews. So yeah,
That's
it's nice to sort of be able to open the door to the general population as well and give them some insight to how things are done on the other side of the table.
yeah, that's cool.
That's good, mate. Well, for those that don't know Tim, I'll butcher your bio, so I might just let you just give people a little brief snapshot of what you're currently doing and maybe some of your background.
Yeah, so I'm a physio or a PT as they call them over here by background. So I graduated 2002, and then my first year in professional sport was 2004. So I was pretty lucky to get a start early in the NRL, so Canberra Raiders, and then I've more or less been involved ever since. And I've kind of moved between pretty much all the major codes now, with the exception of baseball. So
Awesome.
everything from NRL to Super Rugby to Rugby Sevens to AFL to I'm forgetting something here, but yeah, lately I've been over here in the US since December of 23, with the Commanders in the NFL. So good diversity. I finished a PhD in 2016, which was on ACL. And early days, it was very much around kind of getting away from time-based sort of rehab and then sort
Mm.
of trying to push like functional markers of progression and what correlates to like return to sport. And then that really sort of you think you're going to do a PhD and just have all the answers by the end of it, and all you do is just kind of realize how shit everything is. The way that we do everything is crap. So
Yeah. Yep.
so it really just became this kind of evolution from there, and that's where the pitch ready stuff started, which was you know just trying to add as much rigor to kind of return to play decisions.
Yep.
And that's between that and the stuff that I've been doing in sport. That's kind of kept me busy sort of pretty much ever since. So the database is around 1,500 athletes now, everything from
Nice.
professional level, sort of all the way around, through to your your recreational sort of athletes.
Yep.
So and in between that, I've also sort of run a physio clinic, based in Canberra as well. So
Mate, how do you get your 8 hours sleep a night? You'll probably be stretched for that
I'm
to
pretty
make
good.
sure.
My head hits the pillow and I'm out. That's for damn sure.
Oh, that's good, mate. It's a wonderful CV you've accumulated over the years, and we'll obviously dive a little bit more into maybe some of your, I guess, your theories and principles or philosophies when it comes to ACL. But I just want to, like your extensive background, I think is quite interesting. Like with your different codes, knowing that at any moment, any clinician could see a rugby player, could see a, footy player, a netball player, a basketball player, a hockey player walk through the door. What have you noticed, as different as all those sports have been that you've been with, have you noticed any, I guess, similarities between the athletes, like when it comes to ACL management? Like, is it this kind of 80/20 rule where, 80% of the rehab probably is good for all the athletes that walk in the door, and the other 20% kind of comes down to that sport specific conditioning on court, on field. Yeah, what's your kind of take on that?
Yeah,
And
I think that's dead right. Like it's really like working from the other end of the spectrum, like starting from the end point is it's really about like working out what's the same and what's different.
Yep.
Um, and like you said, like having your principles. So if you talk about rehab models, like we're talking everything from like stage one, where it's kind of early post injury or post surgery kind of phase. Then you've got like your pre running sort of strength phase. Then you've got like a linear running phase. Then you've got like a speed agility sort of plyometric like intensity power type focus. Then you've got like integration, and then you've kind of got like return to play and maintenance. And then depending on what sport you're dealing with is you try and shoehorn what is relevant for each of those sports, and I think that's probably the key to it all. And it's really like not trying to just whatever works for, say, like an AFL player, like Australian rules football player, versus a rugby league player versus like an NFL player. Like it's really just like trying to understand the demands of the sport, um, and then trying to replicate that as much as you can, particularly towards the pointy end. But to your point, is like the way that you assess an ACL clinically is not different for an NFL player to a soccer player. Like, so there's definitely some commonality there, which is just based purely on anatomy and physiology at the
Yep.
end of the day. So
Yeah, and that early stage rehab too, I'd imagine, getting the knee quiet and calm and all those kind of things. It's probably not that greatly different between
no,
athletes.
it's
It's the same
exactly the
principles.
same.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's exactly the same.
Yeah, and I think that's probably where, a lot of, maybe a lot of people might get tripped up early on, sort of thinking they need to tailor it early, to try and get on that sports specific conditioning phase a lot earlier than what they need to, if they, basically follow those simple principles of just calming it down and restoring, getting rid of a lot of the impairments, and allowing that, front end to really settle.
It's really like so I absolutely agree with that. And then I think where on the other end where it can go awry is by holding people in like technical running,
Yep.
sort of the technical running space for like too long. Like instead of just trying to find ways of drip feeding things in that just looks like their sport, even if it's at a low intensity,
Yep.
like something as simple as like if they're a basketballer, just getting them to as soon as they can physically stand there and shoot, like get them to start doing that, because
Yep.
it's more about like what they can do rather than what they can't do. And I think like the trap for young players is to focus on the knee and not necessarily focus on the person
Yes.
and like and the endpoint. So I think as long as you're thinking in those two spectrums, then like that's the model, I think.
Going to have some good wins for sure. I remember, like, just as patient I saw last week, he's a basketball player. He's 6 weeks into his rehab, and his knee's comfortable enough to walk around. And he's like, "Oh, can I pick up a basketball and shoot some free throws?" Like, fine. Like, you're not going to tear your ACL shooting free throws. You're fairly stable and stationary, and your knee's pretty calm. His eyes just lit up with happiness. It was just like all of a sudden now he just sort of feels like he's back to normal. And just the simple act of getting someone on an exercise bike early, like it's just, once their knee can bend a certain range, it's let them go, give them some opportunities to feel happy and joy, and rather than sort of saying no all the time, we've got to find some opportunities to say yes, and
Yeah,
give them.
what can they
Yeah.
do? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that I've found pretty interesting in that early piece that you talked about is your PhD, focus on moving away from time-based stuff, and looking for some functional measures or for some functional criteria to let people go. Ender King and Rula Kotsufaki had some. I spoke to him last week, and they had some really interesting research pop up about this 9 month figure and how it's now highly questioned based on their work from Aspetar. Where do you currently sort of sit with
Yeah,
your
I've been on that. I've been on that soapbox for years,
yeah,
and like again, just quietly sort of sitting back watching it all kind of play out. But yeah, and again, the beauty of having so much data on so many people is you can have confidence in the things that you say,
yep,
and really like time is a byproduct of being able to get enough things in from like a quality point of view, but in itself kind of guarantees nothing.
yep,
But even like years ago, there were studies that looked at breaking strains of ACLs, like, and again it doesn't work like that in reality, but the native ACL is somewhere around 1200 Newton from like all the
yep,
research you read around that, and they'll have like 5 strand, it's even like semitendinosus grafts that'll be like well over 2000, sometimes up to 4000. So like from a
Yeah.
pure mechanical point of view, which is the argument that people used for like why to delay things, like just doesn't make, if it gets the wrong force at the wrong time, it doesn't matter how far
Yeah.
down the rehab spectrum you are. So it's more about not the body not putting itself in that position kind of in the first place is
Yeah.
really like one of the bigger factors. So time is important, just from the sense of it does allow some things to take place, but it's in itself kind of guarantees nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. So would you currently align? I guess that's the sort of question. Like you wouldn't use, say, an arbitrary 9 month figure for your athletes. Like prove to me that you're ready to perform and you're ready to step onto the field.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, and obviously prove along the way that your knee is happy, and it can cope with what we're throwing at it.
yeah, and again, like coming back to like that's where the pitch ready stuff does give me a lot of confidence, is because now I've got uh, numbers that will, and we've got a reasonable idea as to the ones that then went and got hurt again. So you
Yep.
can just, it just gives you as much as science can kind of help you in terms of having confidence as to where they sit relative to a normal population. So again, like a lot of the work for years was talking about symmetry, for example, as where like if I had to decide between absolutes and symmetry, I'd take absolutes any day of the
Yep.
week, um, just for lots of those reasons. So
Yep.
yeah,
Yep. And have you got with pitch ready, for those that aren't familiar with pitch ready, can you sort of give our listeners a breakdown of what are your kind of key measures you're looking at in terms of any strength measures you can conduct, any jumping and landing tests that you do? Do you tailor it differently per athlete, or do you have a set list of things that you test people on?
there is a list of things, but really like again, like I love analogies, and everything that we do in terms of like return to sports batteries to me falls under one of two broad themes. Where, and the analogy is like a racing car driver. So a racing car team. So you've got the car and you've got the driver. The
Yep.
car is everything that makes the car go fast, which in terms of rehab is strength, power, mobility, speed. Like all the sort of physical qualities. Stability. Um, all that sort of thing. And then on the other side, you got the racing car driver, which is how the body chooses to do things like under high intensity. And so the racing car driver, if you're going 60 kilometers an hour, you can be drunk and you'll still won't crash the car because
Yep.
it's not really testing what you're doing under like really quick reaction. As where if you're going 200 kilometers an hour,
Yep.
that's a very different beast in itself. So that within those two buckets, it's having confidence around the racing car driver is movement competency. Like again, there's plenty of research that will talk about the scenarios that ACLs tend to happen and the context that they happen. So it's really about trying to replicate those as much as humanly possible and having confidence where people sit relative to a normal population. And then the capacity side of it, which is the stuff that is a bit more easy to measure, is quad strength, hamstring strength, calf strength, jump distances, jump heights, even like stability. You measure, you're talking about like having a quiet knee, you can measure a joint effusion, you can measure
Yep.
range of motion, like all of that sort of stuff. So like everything that I look at sort of falls in under those two buckets.
Yep. Awesome. That's cool. And with the time, just going back to the time a bit, do you think there's, because I've just got a bit of pushback like from some people who've said, oh no, we still have to wait 9 months. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
I kind of get that there's certainly some biological healing time we need to respect, and maybe some of the data that has been put out there, like from Aspetar and your own sort of 1500 pitch ready sort of crew. Do you think there's a bit of a bias there towards the more elite ACL rehabber, versus your general population who won't have access to probably the better S&C staff and the better S&C programming, or the better quality rehab, so to speak, if we were to put
Yeah.
that sort of into a
Yeah.
term.
I think like,
Do you
yeah,
think there's
better
a difference
quality.
there?
I think it's like you obviously get with more help and a lot of elite athletes, for example, you're dealing with like the 1% of the gene pool a lot of the time. So they have some advantages in that regard, and that does then mean that their trajectory of rehab is going to be faster. So that there is that argument, which I do definitely agree with. I had to do a talk in LA a couple of weeks ago at a conference, and I put up data that, again, like I've got calculated days from day of injury and day of surgery to like test date, and then like putting up like on a big scatter diagram for all the different metrics, hamstring strength, calf strength, quad strength, jump quality, like all that sort of stuff. And um, again, like as time goes on, there is this trend upwards,
Yeah.
but you've got people down here like that are 600 days and they're still down. So that's where, like, yes, there is a correlation between elapsed time and generally expectation of function,
Yeah.
but there is no like set thing there, which is where like you're ready when you're ready, as
Yeah.
opposed to it just being you hit the magic 9 months or 12 months, or even
Yeah.
like Tim Hewitt a few years ago was talking like 2 years.
Yeah.
So it's bounced around a lot, but
Yeah.
um, yeah, I just keep coming back to having confidence around what normal people do,
Yeah.
and then if you meet that, then that's when you're ready.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, I tend to lean that way too. Yeah, it's a funny one. I always probably get a bit nervous with young people. I think that's probably where I would probably get a bit nervous with coming back earlier than 9 months. Those are probably a little bit more stronger, got a bit more of a training age and a little bit more robust and resilient and have got some really high measures. I'll probably be a little bit more flexible with the 9 month figure, but yeah, I think that's my only kind of, I guess, clinical concern there as a young one. But it could just be the fact that I don't see enough of it at a high level, and the ones that have failed for me in the past have probably just had some things work against them. But yeah, that's just my own personal experience. But
And
whether or
the
not
reality
you've seen
is,
it,
yeah, well, the reality is getting, you need on the back end of it, working backwards, is they need to have a period of time where they're functioning normally before they play like a competitive game, or,
mm,
whatever their sport ends up being. So the reality is for lots of people, getting a good bulk of that. And like I said, people that you want to minimize risk as much as possible, the longer that they're in that normal space before they go to a competitive game, the better. So the reality is if you allow, say, like 4 weeks, if you're trying to be like, relatively conservative about the whole thing, or
yeah,
more, then okay, so if we're talking 9 months, you're now down to 8 or even 7.5 months.
yeah,
To get to that point of integrate, like being totally unrestricted, you have to have like modified versions of training and normalize all the other like sort of different benchmarks before you have confidence to kind of let them go. So
yeah,
like all of a sudden you can get to 7 and sort of 6-ish months like really quite quickly. So when you think
yeah,
about the average person doesn't run, especially if they've had a RICO, until like 3-ish kind of months
mm,
as the average. Like it doesn't leave a lot of wiggle room. So
no.
your trajectory has to be pretty spot on. Otherwise, you just run out of time. No matter, so it becomes like a mute point anyway.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. I always, try to get people to, be flexible. It's nice to have a goal. And if that goal sits between 9 and 12 months, and, if you're really pushing it, you've got a, competition even before that. It's all right. It's an achievable thing, but we've got to make sure you're in that training environment in an unrestricted fashion for at least, 3 or 4 weeks before we open up. It's not as if, we have a testing battery day and, you pass all the tests and you're playing competition the next
Yeah,
day.
and I hate that personally. Like I've been put in that situation over the years sometimes, and it's like someone's looking to get benchmarked, and then like it's Tuesday and they're trying to play on Saturday.
Yeah.
Like it's if we're seriously having those conversations, then like that's a bad idea at the outset. I don't care what the numbers kind of
Yeah.
say, because something's wrong about the implementation about that. So
Yeah.
yeah, like there is just no replacement for just having a, a, a block of time where you're just normal.
Yeah. What do you feel? This is a bit off topic, but what do you feel about those that are coming back, kind of in the middle to late stage? Say they've had an ACL injury at the back end of a season, they've had modified pre-seasons, or even if they were lucky enough to kind of sail through rehab, but they did the injury in the pre-season and they get close enough come finals time. Like, where do you kind of sit with that? Do you still, if they're ready, they're ready, or do you sort of say, these guys have been playing all year, they're a bit more conditioned than you. Like, does that risk versus reward scenario
It
come
becomes,
into it?
yeah, well, that's literally what I was about to say. I think is
Yep.
like it just comes down to like risk reward.
Yep.
It's and if it's a young kid, then your risk appetite is going to be minimal,
Yep.
versus if it's a professional athlete, they're they're an adult, and they're allowed to be sort of informed in terms of how that decision making sort of looks. So um, I think the dice rolls, both
Yeah.
ways in that regard. You got some people that like they just want to have they don't want that pressure of like having to come in, and like others are like very like that's their goal, and if you take
Yep.
that away from them, then that's really like demoralizing for them at the
Yep.
same time. So I'm not sure that there's a set formula in that
No.
regard.
I'm sure if there's a late state the later older athletes, they're kind of they're in the grand final or in the semi-finals and they've got a chance of having their one and only shot of winning a championship. You'd certainly let them go and be involved in that for sure. But it's going to be a case by case basis, I'd say.
And everything's um, it's contextual. Like at the end of the day, like and I think like the real litmus test is 10 years later. Like looking back at that, would they say that that was a good decision, like one way or the other? And I
Yep.
think that like that's how I tend to like apply stuff as well. So it's all good and well, like in the moment, but 10 years later, are they gonna regret that going like why did I do that? Like what a stupid idea, sort of
Yep.
thing. So
Yeah, for sure.
just try and have a bit more of a sort of global view of the whole thing as well.
Yeah, so unfortunately, a lot of under 25-year-olds don't have that frontal lobe development to appreciate that at the moment. So it's it's a thing for later on. Have you got a feel? What you alluded before, you got a few people. You got an idea of some people who have not been successful in their return to sport. Have you got an idea of those kind of measures that are kind of a bit more critical than others? Say like quad strength over hammy and calf, or vice versa, or a certain series of hop tests that's probably a little bit more critical, vertical versus horizontal, for example, based on your kind
Yeah,
of, re-injuries and what are things that are standing out between those that are successful in their return to sport, those that unfortunately fail?
my bias is probably more towards the skill acquisition side of it, to be honest.
Yep.
Like capacity it really deals with the ability to absorb and produce force. So they're in the ballpark when they're good with that.
Yep.
But it's really like again, like all the data that we've got, probably the big three that play out kind of consistently. Um, so of all the data that we've got, where we've tested them and then we've sent them back out into the wide world and then looked at like re-injury rates. Generally, the big three is people who at time of foot contact doing so things like cross hopping or drop jumping and then like high speed change of direction is at time of foot contact having like a stiff straight leg, so like knee extension.
Yep.
um, People who go wide of their center of mass. So to generate lateral movement with change of direction, their foot is relatively wide for a given unit of change of direction. And
Yep.
then the third one, which is probably a more recent evolution, is what I like to call pepper grind effect, which is where you have one segment being externally rotated and then the other
Yep.
segment being internally rotated. So
Yep.
they're kind of, how they talk about it comes in and out of vogue over the years where we're talking about stud patterns on boots and cleats, because people are worried about their like boots getting stuck in the ground.
Yep.
Um, if you ever try it sometime, is just even on carpet where there's no friction, is fully externally rotate your legs and then kind of turn and like it you feel it straight at your knee before you even get to the point of generating any friction. So this pepper grinding thing is where you have basically a leg that is externally rotated and then the lower leg is internally rotated. So you just get like these opposing kind of forces. So for those three things alone, the population we've got, the re-injury rate for people that have that consistently is about 15 to 16%,
Yep.
versus the ones that don't do those three things, it's kind of around 1.5%. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Big
um, so,
difference.
so, so capacity, and like I said, we're talking big numbers now. So it's more than just a sort of, sample bias, and it's things all over the world.
Yeah.
So for me, the big three is basically those three things: stiff
Yeah.
straight leg, foot wider center of mass, and then that kind of pepper grinding sort of effect.
Yeah. And can all three of those, are they modifiable, like with training
Yeah,
and sort of,
it's
skill
skill
acquisition?
acquisition
Yep.
at the end of the day, and like again, working with. I've had the advantage of doing this with like lots of different rehab teams, so it's not like they're just my patients that I'm looking after. It's like you go through it, then you talk to your people who are working in sport that are very smart in their own right, and then you get 6 to 8 weeks later, you might see like what the change was. And in the cases where it hasn't worked, is really more about athlete understanding of what they're trying to achieve in drills, and um, the sort of the feedback loop of like what, whether it was good execution or not. Like that's the two things. The actual drill itself is less important. It's just
Yeah.
an opportunity for like part practice. But in terms of like an expectation from like a skill acquisition point of view, it's kind of like 4 to 8 weeks is like the ballpark of where you're
Yeah.
trying to do it. So you won't fix it in 2 weeks.
No.
And if it's kind of not in a meaningful way within that 8 week period, then probably the intervention is not quite missing the mark.
Yeah, yep, yep. Yeah, well, that's great insight. That'll give some people to think about with how they do that. It sort of it's another viewpoint, I think, where a lot of people will still rely on those, measures of strength or hot performance, whereas, this insight that you're sharing certainly gives people an idea of, teaching how to, move better. I think that really drives home the importance of getting on field or getting some eyes on the person as they land on one leg, as they land on two legs, changing direction. Because there's, you watch any sport, there's always these really, and I think that's probably the tricky thing I've found in the past is you got these great movers, right? You got these unbelievable changing of direction athletes. If you try to, if we do change their strategy, like do we make them less of an athlete, or is there is there a way like to still keep them athletic and evasive without completely slowing them down? Or yeah,
It's context related. So you
yeah,
hear people like one of the things you'll talk about with change direction is you don't want people doing that thing where they'll break on the step before, which is their penultimate step, and then throwing their leg wide.
yes,
And so you talk about that a lot. And people say like again, like athletes will go like I'm coming up into when I'm if it's say it's like rugby or something and I'm coming into the line is like that's how I evade and that's how I put feet on. It's like, yeah, that's fine. Slow speed, like if you look at NBA where their feet are wider, their center of mass, and they're doing all of those things, but
yeah,
there's no decel, there's no entry velocity. So it's
yeah,
context. What we're talking about is like line break or jamming off the line defensively where there's like speed behind them and momentum, and then they're having to break and change direction at the same time.
yep,
That's what you're trying to do. So it's heavily context specific.
yep, yep. Yep, awesome. Good sight. We might move gears to a bit more clinical stuff and put your clinical hat back on again. Might how much are you working day to day, hands on these days, or are you a bit more of an oversight kind
I'm
of?
very over here. I'm much more managerial. Yeah, like it's a they're big staffs over here.
Yeah. Just tell people what to do, mate. No, it's awesome.
Yeah.
It's open chain obviously, and I ask this of everyone. I always get tried with all our ACL experts that sort of come on and share their knowledge. Open chains copped some heat in the last decade or so. It seems like the pendulum has swung back a little bit more. There's been some better research published in the last probably 3 to 5 years. There was a whole decade there where things went missing, I think, and now it's just started to become a little bit more looked at. Yeah, I guess where do you sit with the usage of open chain exercises?
But again, it's a bit like the time based thing. I've been fine with that for a long
Yep,
time. Like it's even like again like research wise, there was stuff around sort of 2012 that looked at even like shear forces of ACL and even an isokinetic dynamometer, which is like probably as hard an open chain thing as you can do.
yep,
The measured shear force for that they sort of found was around kind of 350 newtons. This is where like again we're talking about native ACL around 1200 newtons. So like the actual measured shear force is probably not what we sort of thought about. So like as soon as I saw things like that, I was less worried than probably most. And then I've just never been burned
yep,
by doing those things. And like I said, with the benchmarking stuff, is we get measured laxity. So what should happen is I should
yeah.
have
You should say
I
all
should
these
have
loose leaves.
laxity that's doing it, and I never got it. So um, as time went on, confidence increased rather than kind of decreased with that stuff.
Yeah. And do you have any, with your, I'm sure like you've probably met dozens and dozens of surgeons along the way who've probably had their opinions and protocols. Like, do you have any kind of recommendations for any, young clinicians who meet that resistance from a surgeon who, probably aren't strong enough in their voice or their opinion to say, open chain exercises are fine, your protocols are outdated. I think it's a pretty hard conversation to have, but like,
It's
do you have any
hard. Yeah, it's hard because you're dealing with people's like core
belief?
beliefs.
Yeah,
So it's that's a really hard one, and I'm not sure what the answer is other than just um, probably by just slowly building the relationship.
yeah,
And because it doesn't really work to just go running your mouth off in terms of like quoting research and this and that, because all you do is just get people offside. So like I think it's like over time people see that you know what you're talking about, and that you are kind of evidence based and all that. So like you can sort of feed those things over time, but it's probably more about, for me it's always been more about building the relationship. They see that you're not just making stuff up. There's actually some things behind it, and that's probably the fast way. So
yeah.
it's not a quick solution. It's a bit more of a slow burn. But having said that, the older version of me, anytime those things happen, I'm kind of like, all right, you want me involved? I'm having, not just that, but like lots of things. It'd be like if you want me involved, I'm not going to have a bar of that for this reason, this reason, this reason.
Yep.
It's your body. You do whatever you want. Like, but so I'm probably a bit more black and white about it now. But
Yep.
again, it is a hard conversation.
Yeah, and to this very day, I've get asked every time I run a workshop or a conference, and I don't have the answer for it other than, yeah, it's a relationship building. Like, so exactly what you said. Like, it's relationship building. It's spending the time working with the surgeons themselves, maybe having to go off and maybe watch them do operations and do ACL reconstructions and be a little bit more present. Just so you're just not another young clinician who thinks they know everything, that's just going to dump
Yeah,
all these
who are
ACL
you?
papers.
Like,
Yeah.
where are you? Yeah, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, yeah. It just allows you to break them down slowly and get them to sort of think, a little bit more of a physio mindset rather than them just sort of concentrating on being. And ultimately, surgeons just want to get better at surgery. They don't necessarily want to get better at the latest rehab practices and update their protocols. They're just too busy for that stuff. So it's our job to just slowly educate them, but it won't be an overnight fix, that's for sure. Awesome, mate. So just reflecting on some of your rehab as well in the past, maybe in your early careers, have you had any like really, challenging cases that come to mind? Like we always celebrate our wins for sure, but have you learned anything along the way, maybe from some of your early failures as an early career clinician, or some gentle mistakes you made in your first couple of years in sport that you can share and reflect on?
I think like climbing the hierarchy, like definitely getting knee extension, as in like range of motion, knee extension. Um, that's like just a given. Like they have to be
Yep.
able to walk normally. Knee has to be able to load and unload itself. Obviously, you mentioned having a quiet knee. Like that's obviously important. If I think about like on the pointy end of things, especially in like the last several years, is which comes around to the whole non-surgical ACL sort of thing for me
Mm.
is again, like I've got lots and lots of data about modifiable risk factors, especially when we start talking about skill acquisition and capacity. And the ones that have caught me off guard are partial ACLs or ones where they just didn't have a good biological response, like with the
Yep.
graft, like ones where the body just somehow even just kind of um, degraded the graft like
Yep.
while it was there. So um, I'm very much, especially with this whole argument about non-surgical kind of raging around, I'm sort of quietly sitting back there because I've had a number of examples of ones where they went through bracing protocols and had
Yep.
MRI studies and all that sort of stuff, and then they had um, good evidence in terms of managing modifiable risk factors, and then had another issue. So
Yes. Yep.
the it really comes down to like stability of the knee. I think is important, and time will tell. But I probably I sit more in the camp of if it's my knee and I'm probably more going the time tested sort of method rather than
Yes.
the more recent sort of one, just because I think you just get a lot more variability in terms of the result.
Yeah, yeah, it's the similar conversation I'm having at the moment. It's definitely it's new emerging. We won't know the data for probably 5 years yet when the Embrace trial by Steph Filbay, Jane Rooney, and Tom Cross is done and comparing ACL reco versus cross bracing. My with the cross bracing, just for my 2 cents, I had similar kind of experience. I had a young kid go through cross bracing protocol, had good MRI healing, had reasonable stability on clinical testing, maybe a slightly little bit more lax on his ACL injured side, but had enough realigning of fibers to make us go, well, it's not going to get any stronger. And, this is working with a surgeon here in town as well. He goes, well, he's got healing. It's aligned. It won't get any thicker or stronger, really. No point holding him back any longer. 2 games in, re-injures it again.
Yeah.
Like yeah, I've had some cases like that where I think agree. I think time will tell. And we'll sort of see where it goes. But the re-injuries are always the ones that kind of or- they're always harder when it's in a young person. I've always found that challenge of kind of sitting comfortable. I never will get comfortable with that under 18-year-old who has to go through it for a second time, and it's like, well, these people are just they're hard. They're a hard group. These teenage kids. You don't know what their rehab quality's like when they sort of go home, and they may do rehab for 9 to 12 months, but compared to an older, more mature athlete who is really bought into the whole I guess consistency of rehab. I always found that younger generation just a little bit harder to manage, but that's just my own two cents worth.
Yeah. So I think like, yeah, coming back to the ones that probably in recent years that kind of caught me off guard is where like, yeah, I think is just this unknown in terms of like what the definition of stability is.
Yep.
I think is like one that is, I'm not sure we have the answer on that yet.
Yep. Yep. Time will tell. Well, Tim, we're probably pushed for time. I know you got another meeting to get to, and I appreciate your wealth of knowledge here, mate. One final thing I always ask my guests, if there's one or two pieces of advice you can give to aspiring physios that are involved in sport or ACL rehab management, have you got any words of wisdom to share with our audience?
ACL rehab specifically,
Yeah. Yep. And
I
then
think,
and then generally, and then in sport.
yeah, I think like generally, if you're talking sports physio generally, I feel like the modern era is really about like, rehab exercises and, fancy, because that's sort of what looks cool on Instagram and all that sort of stuff. But like,
Yep.
I just think nailing your ability to nail diagnosis and is like the key fundamental to it all. Because
Mm.
if you have that nailed, then everything else you're working from like a ground truth that is true. And if your diagnosis is wrong, then everything else is bad.
Yep.
Um, ACL wise, I think it's really like work from the back, work from the end point backwards, which is where okay, what's the person's goals, what's their timetable, like I said, what through the whole rehab, what can they do rather than what can't they do, and then try and use their sport as a way, like as a rehab stimulus in itself.
Yep.
I think it's on a macro level, to me that's the thing that if, especially if you were young, you sort of start from the front end and work out,
Yep.
and being very linear in your rehab, is in like I get range of motion first, then I get strength, then I get them running, then I start working on change of direction, as well. Like for me,
Yep.
it's very horizontal. Like I'll try and have like a lateral movement thing from the get go. I'll have
Yep.
like a quad thing from the get go. I'll have a calf thing. I'll have a a vertical thing. I'll have a horizontal thing. Like basically all the key components that I'm going to want on the back end,
Yep.
I've got it in there as early as humanly
Yep.
possible. So you can have people just walking, doing change practice and change direction at a walking thing. There's
That's
no
right.
mechanical stress to the knee, but like it's practicing something that you're going to want to do intensity, like with intensity, kind of later on. So
Yep.
um, thinking about it now, that's probably like one of the big things is know the end point, and then also have like your box of things. Like you talked about hamstring strength, calf strength, quad strength, vertical, horizontal, change direction, fitness, like all that sort of stuff is like try and challenge yourself from the get go to have something for that. Now, what it means is if they've just had their surgery, okay, quad can be just very easy open chain, quad activation. Hamstring can be heel slides.
Yep.
Calf can be calf raises. Like it doesn't have to be um, super hard like from the get go, but you have something in there, and then try and challenge yourself to progress that the whole way through.
Yeah, that's awesome. Awesome advice, and it's starting to become a consistent theme amongst the people I've sort of spoken to so far. And the King, Eric Muir have also said the same thing. Reverse engineer your rehab, plans. Think of the end at you've got to get the end goal in mind, and then start sort of working backwards. What things do we want to achieve at the end, and then we've got to build our kind of layers accordingly for that goal, rather than sort of just shooting off down the road and running headfirst into it and sort of hoping you get there at the end. We've got to sort of have a better plan than that. So that's awesome sage advice, mate. So thank you.
And I think like the only other thing is really around like having lack of cognitive rigidity, as in like athletes being really robotic in the end stages. They're very happy. So like if people roll past like a rehab session with me at the end point, I'm sure they're just thinking I'm like running some kind of like school holiday program, because they're just people are playing games and they're doing all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
But you're building up through your principles so that in the end it looks like sport.
it looks like
Because
fun.
you're trying to have a system that's malleable. They're not, they haven't just spent their whole time running to a cone and stepping off a cone, like all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome, mate. Great advice. All right, Tim. Well, that'll do, mate. That's been really helpful. I'm sure all our clinicians that have tuned in today, and even our patients that are watching this as well, have sort of taken some really important nuggets of information. So, I appreciate it, Tim. Have you got any websites, social media pages that people can find you if they ever want to reach out and get in touch, mate?
I'm not a massive social media person. I've tried to sort of stay away from that, but I mean there are some things that, like LinkedIn, and I think there's a Twitter or X or whatever it's called. Instagram is, if you like watching me catch fish, that's about all that one's good for. Pitch Ready's got its own website, which is
Yep.
www.pitch-ready.com. That's probably the closest thing to a professional thing that I've sort of run
Awesome.
out with.
Awesome. No doubt people will have a look at that, mate, and get in touch and check you out. Well, Tim, appreciate it, mate. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for listening today and watching this interview. And stay tuned for the next installment of interviews on ACL Hub. See you next time.
And